For our actual shader, what you're going to do is you're going to take the lit shader that you opened and you're going to copy everything from it over to this shader. The only thing that'll be different is you want to make sure that your name is not still URP lit. It needs to be custom / whatever your shader name is. And then we're going to add in here our properties. So these are the properties we want for our effect. These are the ones I was talking about earlier. They need to match exactly what we put in the detailed GUI. And then otherwise, we're going to leave all the passes in here. These are the default passes that are part of the URP rendering process. So we're going to leave all those the same, but what we're going to do is we're going to add in a new pass. So there should be 9 passes for the default URP stuff. At the bottom of that, we're going to add a new pass. We're going to name it thermal. And the most important part here is that you have light mode equals thermal. When we did our render feature, we're calling a specific light mode by this tag. So if it's not tagged with that light mode, the shader won't run. The name is more so there for visual purposes for us to know what it's called, but this is where the URP actually pulls the rendering data from. Otherwise, you can play around with the culling settings, Z-writing, blending to create the effect that you want. And then make sure you define your textures and your samplers for each part that you might need. For this thermal effect, you don't actually need this base map part here. I have it from something else that I was working on, but you will probably want this _heatmap_st. This is a specific property that gets the tiling and offset from the material properties. It needs to be named _st with the exact same name as the texture. Otherwise, it won't register properly. And then I have our heat multiplier and a float for our surface. Surface is just the setting in the URP material that should be right here. It tells us whether or not we're doing an opaque or a transparent material. We're still overriding the actual layer that it's being drawn to, or the Q, but that is, it's useful for some stuff later on. So attributes, exact same as the default. You can copy this from pretty much any standard shader and use it. Varyings, I have a UV and then a no offset UV. So this was for that base map thing that I was talking about. You'll probably just want the UV, and that we defined the clip space position as transform object to H clip of the object space coordinate. And then our out.uv equals in.uv times the tiling plus the offset. And I have it as the offset plus times. So that way, if the offset isn't equal to 0, it actually offsets the texture. So it moves around a bit. It's just for creating some basic animation. Then in our frag, we sample the heat texture. This is just a white texture that represents what is hot and what is cold. I'll show you one in a few minutes. So I only actually pull one of these channels. I pull the R channel to get the relative heat. The reason why I'm doing it as a full sample of a float 4 is because I also use the alpha value later. You don't necessarily need to do this, but I found it works well because everything ends up being transparent with how this render setup works. So it's easier to have this be a full sample including the alpha. This part here is what I was talking about before. This is a custom thing I did. Don't worry about this part. You won't need this. This is for very specific materials where you want one texture to offset, one not to. So don't worry about that. But we're going to take in our relative heat value we got before, and we're going to multiply it by our heat multiplier to get our absolute heat. Then we just take in a float 3 that starts at black, and if the heat is below 0.25, we lerp between black and purple. If it's below 0.5, we lerp between purple and red, 0.75, red and orange, and 1, orange and white. And if it's above 1, we'll return white. If you don't have this less than 1 and you just have this as your else if to return white, it'll overshoot and it'll start to become emissive because the HDR value will overflow from 1. So It depends if you want bloom or not in this effect. I kind of simulate bloom later on with a blur shader. So I just make it clamp at 1, but it's up to you. And then this here is just where it checks if surface equals 0, which means opaque, then the heat sample's alpha is 1. And finally, we return a float 4 of the color and the alpha. So basically, this just overrides, even if the texture has transparency on it, if we set it to opaque, it will always force it to be opaque. So that's our actual shader. I also have another one here. This is a thermal only shader. So this one has the same 2 properties, heat map, heat multiplier, and it also has the tag thermal, but this doesn't have a pass for the forward rendering. So it doesn't have a universal forward tag, which means this won't render unless we have this tag set in our drawing mode. So this is a way to make something only appear when you're in this mode. Otherwise, everything in here is the same as before. It's just the same lerp. So now with those set up, if we go back to Unity here, if you go to your shader, the Visor material, and we create a material from it, I already have a bunch in here. You'll see that when you go to detail input, there should be 2 more properties here. It should have a heat map and a density map. And then beside them, there will be a value. And if I look over at one of these 2 bridges here, I can change this value. And what this does is it basically automatically sets it multiplies the entire map that we gave it, which I'll show you here. This is the heat map for the bridge. It actually has some transparency in there, which is how you can see through it here. And that's why we wanted to make sure that we had that ability to use transparency. If I went to this material and I set it from transparent to opaque, you'll see that now we can't see through the material anymore. So leave that as transparent, but you can play around with the heat values to get whatever effect you're looking for. And that is the basics of the shader. Realistically, it's a pretty simple thing. In the next video, we're going to go over how to make a frame feedback buffer, so that way we get kind of a motion blur and a trails effect from this. That's going to be another render feature. So I'll see you in that one.